Week 13 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few plays I look to buy and trade for. So when most trade lines up in majority of leagues, and this week being the last week for trade deadlines, player Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. So McLaurin, he got off to his great start early in the season, but the last 3 weeks, we haven't seen much out of him. Week 10 in Seattle, 4 catches, 33 yards. Week 11 versus the Giants, 5 catches, 43 yards. And week 12 at the Cowboys, a team he's owned throughout his career, only 4 catches, 50 yards. So he's failed to reach double-digit fantasy points the last 3 weeks. Here's Terry McLaurin. Week 13, a good matchup versus Miami. And I know he's in an offense that's been a hit and miss this season, but Sam Howell's amongst the league leaders in passing yards. So right now, Terry McLaurin, while he hasn't done much over the last few weeks, and the targets are still there, and him and Howell just missing on those bigger plays, he's a player I would go out there and buy this week. The next player is Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants. And Barkley coming off a bad game versus not a great defense in the New England Patriots, and now going on bye week here in week 13. I think he's a perfect buy low candidate. The last few weeks for Barkley, besides that one big game in Washington, we haven't seen much. Week 10 at Dallas, 13 carries, 66 yards a catch, -5 yards. Week 11 in Washington, 14 carries, 83 yards, 4 catches, 57 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And week 12 versus New England, a pedestrian game, 12 carries, 46 yards, a catch, 6 yards. So right now, Barkley, like I said, he's going on bye. And then the Giants to close it out, Green Bay at New Orleans at Philly for the fantasy playoffs, and Los Angeles Rams to Saquon Barkley, who knows a good talent. I know he's behind a bad offensive line and a team that don't really move the football all that great, but Barkley, with his game-breaking ability and just his upside as well, I still think he could go out there and put solid mid-1 running back numbers to number 2 running back numbers. And while he struggled the last 2 out of 3 weeks, he's a perfect buy low this week. Next play is James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals. So James Conner, we know, is a solid running back, physical running back. I know he's on a team where they're trailing a lot this season and have to abandon the run, but James Conner, he's still a decent pass catcher out of the backfield. So since he returned from injury in week 10 versus Atlanta, 16 carries, 73 yards. Week 11 at Houston, 14 carries, 62 yards, 2 catches a yard. And then week 12 versus the Rams in a blowout loss, only 6 carries, 27 yards, 4 catches, 5 yards. So right now, I know he hasn't done much, is James Conner. He's still a starting running back in this league. And like I said, you really don't have to give up much to get him on your fantasy roster. And his remaining schedule, week 13 at the Steelers, 14 of buys, 15 versus San Francisco, week 16 at Chicago, and week 17 at Philadelphia. So I know not the greatest of schedules here for James Conner, but if you're in a pinch and need a running back, I think Conner can help fantasy owners for the remainder of the season. Next play is Puka Nacua of Los Angeles Rams. And Nacua, it's been one good game, one bad game, it seems like, over the last few weeks. And I know this Ram team put up 37 points in the victory in week 12 at Arizona, but Nacua, he didn't do much in that one. 4 catches, 27 yards. So the last 3 out of 4 weeks, believe it or not, Nacua's had single-digit fantasy points with only 1 pop game in week 11 versus Seattle, where he had 5 catches, 70 yards, and a touchdown. So week 13, definitely a tough matchup versus the Browns. They give up the least amount of fantasy points to wideouts on the season, and they got one of the best corners in the league as well in Denzel Ward. But right now, Puka Nacua, we know he's a great route runner. We know he fits this scheme perfectly, with Will McVay's scheme. And we know he has great hands, and he's learning from Cooper Kupp, one of the best receivers, obviously, in the last decade. So right now, like I said, the last month of the season, we haven't seen much out of Nacua. He's still a player I think down the stretch can help fantasy owners, and a player you could get on a discount this week. The next play is Breece Hall of the New York Jets. Breece Hall, I know he's behind a bad offensive line. I know all season it's been poor quarterback play with Boyle and Zach Wilson. But Breece Hall, he's a home run hitter and a big play running back that I think's a top 10 running back in this league. Week 10 at Vegas, 13 carries, 28 yards, 3 catches, 47 yards. Week 11 at Buffalo, 10 carries, 23 yards, 5 catches, 50 yards and a touch. And week 12 versus Miami, 7 carries, 26 yards, 7 catches, 24 yards. So week 13, I know it's a tough matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons. But like I said, it just takes one big play for Breece Hall and a few catches and some decent yards in between the tackles for him to have a big fantasy day. And we saw it this season, even with limitations at quarterback and not moving the football well, Breece Hall's still been a solid running back. So right now, while the numbers have been down the last month of the season, where he's only had more than 11 fantasy points once in that time, he's definitely a buy low per X player. DK Metcalf the Seattle Seahawks. It's been a down year all year for DK Metcalf. We're on the year. He's only got 3 touchdowns. And yes, he'll probably get that 1,000 yards this season. Only 320 yards away is DK Metcalf. But another player, in the last 6 weeks, he only had 3 double-digit fantasy days. So the last few weeks for Metcalf, Week 10 versus Washington, 7 catches, 98 yards. Week 11 at the Rams, his best game of the year, 5 catches, 94 yards and a touch. And Week 12 versus the 9 is 3 catches, 32 yards. So Week 13, a tough matchup with the Cowboys, where they got one of the better defenses in the league and 2 great corners in Stephon Gilmore and DaRon Bland. So it might be tough sledding for him there, but the remainder of the year, very nice schedule. Week 14 at the 9 is 7th most points to receivers. Week 15 versus Philly, most points to receivers. Week 16 at Tennessee, 6th most points. And Week 17 versus the Steelers, 9th most fantasy points. And DK Metcalf, I know he's a great player. I know the numbers haven't been up to snuff for the most part this season, but it just takes him a couple weeks where he could have a few big games in a row where he finishes in the top 15 or even 10 in fantasy points if he really gets on a hot streak. So right now, while you can get him on a discount a little bit, he's a perfect buy low player this week. And the final play I look to buy and trade for is A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. So A.J. Brown, he's had a monster season, no doubt about it, breaking the record early in the year with 125 yards or more receiving in a game, 6 games in a row. But the last few weeks, Brown's numbers have dropped off just a little bit. Week 9 versus the Dallas Cowboys, 7 catches, 66 yards, a touchdown. Week 11 in Kansas City, a catch, 8 yards. And Week 12 versus Buffalo, that touchdown salvages day, 5 catches, 37 yards and a touchdown. So A.J. Brown and Hurts, they've been off a little bit the last few weeks. A few weeks ago, Hurts missed him on a ball that if he threw it over the top, Brown would have a touchdown versus at the Kansas City Chiefs. And then Week 12 versus Buffalo, a few plays were left out there. And Brown had a couple drops as well in that game. So right now, once him and Hurts gets back on the same page, we saw the damage they did from Week 6 to Week 9. And right now, A.J. Brown's still a top 5 wide receiver, in my opinion, in fantasy football. So right now, well, the numbers have been down over the last few weeks. And I'm not saying you're going to get him on a huge discount. It was obviously cheaper than you would have a few weeks ago. He's a buy low player this week, so that's a few plays I look to buy and trade for. 13, the fantasy football season.